Hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, if you don't already know. And if you don't know, why are you listening on this particular episode? Well, if you are, it's probably because of my wonderful guest. She is not only a brilliant speaker, she is also a very, very dear friend of mine. Her name is Jess Pettitt. I always mispronounce your second name. So, Jess, am I pronouncing your second name incorrectly again, or is it correct for once?
Just with the accent. It's pet it like a dog.
Okay, Jess Pettitt, like a dog. And Jess, just to give you a little bit of background of Jess, CSP, Certified Speakers Professional, only really cool speakers have a CSP after their name, has always had a foot in two different approaches to life. In her Texas roots, she believes to thrive in the world, you have to ride two horses at once, one of humility and one of ego. This is why while hosting and performing stand-up in New York City itself, she also worked as a DEI specialist, diversity and inclusion specialist as a day job. She quit her day job after a decade, and almost 20 years later, she still uses humor to deliver actionable content related to everything you wanted to know about where leadership and diversity collide, but are afraid to ask. So this is going to be a very, very interesting and rewarding conversation we're going to have right now. Jess responds that she just makes leaders think as opposed to being a thought leader. Probably should have flipped that sentence, but sure, look, nothing is ever perfect on the day. For diversity, equity, and inclusion work to stick, the first step is an inclusion that matters about what you don't know, and then you can do the best with what you have, some of the time without getting sued, losing talent, or failing customers. That's all the bio out of the way. Jess, it's so nice to speak to you on my podcast. Thanks a million for doing this.
Absolutely. I mean, you really are someone I consider a dear friend. And it's actually really cool to be able to be kind of our professional selves for our audiences together. So thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, what if our professional selves hate each other? I mean, our personal selves like each other and get on really, really well. But what if professionally I'm like, oh my goodness, and you're
I
like,
know.
oh, the worst
Let
podcast. This is
build the intrigue and anticipation for the listeners. Let's see what this conversation is like.
this could be a complete and total mess. So that's great. So first of all, Jess, you want to give us like a 60-second breakdown of your past in terms of the ups and downs, hero's journey, story, background for yourself?
The cliff notes, I think, is I came out of an academic education background. I worked primarily as a college administrator at a number of different organizations in the United States doing diversity work, where I got fired from every one of my jobs. No one is surprised by that when you spend a lot of time with me because I am super fun as long as there is a departing flight. I would like to say everyone that has fired me did hire me back as a much more expensive consultant. So take that, ego horse. Getting fired is also good for the humility horse. Started speaking full time on primarily controversial topics that nobody wants to talk about. I feel like if we can talk about,
Is it time management? Is that what you're
no, I was
talking?
late to that session.
Oh yeah. Okay, good.
So
So
if my position that I like to stay in is we generally have a list of topics that make us pucker and nervous and sweat. We don't know how to have a conversation about them. And I find that fascinating because every single person is very capable of having very challenging conversations about some other topic that somebody else would avoid, right? Like, I didn't go into medicine because I don't want to tell somebody they're dying. I didn't become a lawyer because I don't want to put an innocent person in jail. Like, people have challenging conversations and also have topics that they find so challenging they don't want to talk about. So that's what I do.
So with regards to, and thanks for that, you're really, I guess, is you're talking about mainly DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusivity. I'll start you with a really hard one. Why is it known as equity as opposed to equality? Why is the word equity used in the DEI?
Super juicy, timely question. So, first off, either will do, but equality generally means that all people would end up with exactly the same thing. So if we're talking about like air quality, you would want equal air quality for all people breathing all of the air. Great. When we're talking about opportunity or resources, not everybody wants or needs the same thing. So then when you would use the word equity, it is being able to satisfy people's wants or needs in a way that aligns with what their wants and needs are. So the metaphor I like to use is shoes. I wear a size 11 shoe. My preference is a slip-on Van because I'm a classic Gen Xer. So if every human being on the planet got rainbow, flamey, striped, patterned, size 11 slip-on Vans, that would not be helpful for every single person, but it would be equal. So equity is actually specifying what is your shoe size? How do you feel about slip-on Vans? What's your lifestyle like? Do you need more arch support? Being able to customize based on people's actual wants and needs. That's where equity comes in.
So I have some questions that aren't to do with DEI, but I want to get stuck into DEI right now, if that's okay. So
Certainly.
let's talk about these awkward conversations, because this is something that I know myself, obviously working in the corporate world and working in America, it's of particular importance. Let's speak first to June is obviously Pride Month, right? Could you talk a little bit about what organizations, like, to me, there's memes going around about how organizations all of a sudden in June, they're like, oh, we're Pride, yay, rainbow flags, yay, we're all about it. Are you gay? Well, we love you. And then once July turns around, it's like, sorry, what again? So from your own point of view, give us a little bit of background as to Pride Month, why it matters, if you can, and then also how organizations mess up when it comes to their DEI policies and the all-in nature of June compared to the rest of it.
Yeah, well, the air quotes there are particularly important because when you're trying, that matters. That is better than not trying. And there is an easy way to try that can actually do more harm than not trying in the first place. So that's just kind of a reality that an organization needs to think about. That's not a ghost, that's a dog. So let's back up a little bit just because June being Pride Month is not necessarily known to every human being on the planet. So a little cliff notes, why June? So, depending on whether you live on the West Coast or the East Coast of the United States, there is kind of a different origin story. But generally speaking, June is often in reference to a rebellion that occurred at the Stonewall Inn in New York City in June. And the last weekend of June has now been kind of commemorated or memorialized for this rebellion. The last weekend in June is the beginning of Pride celebrations being public in the United States history of gay history, basically. So then the last weekend of June is when most people have pride marches. Okay, so just the last weekend of June. Now, some places, especially if it's like a college town, college might not be in session in June, so there's not enough people. And so then college towns might wait until October or a fall so that the schools open, more people are around. October 11th is National Coming Out Day, so sometimes pride events might happen around National Coming Out Day, October 11th. But June has now expanded to be a Pride Month. And some of that is around commercial ally work from different corporations, etc. And I believe mostly it is good intentions. And we're kind of back to equality versus equity, is that every marginalized group gets a month, except there's only 12 months, right? And so not every group, but some groups get a month. And June has been allocated mostly to gay and lesbian people. So then there might be kind of different marginalized groups within gay and lesbian populations that have kind of sub marches or sub gatherings or celebrations also in the month of June, whether they're trans folks or queer people of color. I know in New York City, each borough also usually has a march. A Dyke March is usually the day before the last Sunday in June, which historically is an unpermitted march to be more inclusive of women and women of color. So there's kind of a history there, right? So that's kind of a little window. I don't know if you have follow-ups before we get to the
Yeah, just a
tokenization of
couple of
company.
follow-ups on that. So with the Gay Pride Month, let's just, for want of a better expression,
Sure.
you have LGBTQ and then you have other potential letters. And what's the right vernacular? I know this is sort of like a side piece, but what's the right vernacular to use when you're speaking about it? Like I've heard people say LGBT. Then is that excluding the people who are queer?
The
Yeah.
answer is there is not an answer. So to answer the question, the right vernacular is the language that human being uses to describe themselves. So you're going to have to engage in a conversation with every human represented or that will hear anything that you are saying to make sure that you are inclusive. That's not going to happen because we're too lazy. So we're going to pick something. So even calling June Gay Pride Month, gay is often used as an umbrella term to be everything not straight. If you'd like to be more specific than gay as an umbrella term, then gay now becomes generally white men. So then it gets usually paired with L for lesbian, which usually means white lesbians. So you have white lesbians, white gay people. Then you usually throw in a B for bisexual folks. Spoiler alert, and possibly a different podcast. Pansexual, omnisexual, demisexual are a lot of new words that are coming out that are more inclusive of multiple different gender identities and expressions and attractions than just bisexual, but that's usually what the B means. T usually means trans, and that is kind of an umbrella term as well as a specific identity that may or may not also include like non-binary people. Two spirit, you might see NB or TS. Two spirit is usually non-binary or native indigenous folks. Then you usually have a Q can sometimes mean queer as an umbrella term or as an individual identity or questioning sometimes.
So with all that in mind, and again, look, I was familiar with a lot of that, but there's a lot I wasn't familiar with.
That's why I said this could be a completely different thing. So the
Sure.
letters mean multiple different things, especially based on the age or the geographical
Okay.
location, what we're talking about.
So the best, I suppose, system is to be able to ask the person, try to understand and make sure that whatever way of describing them, whatever vernacular you use, you try to be as inclusive as possible of that person in that, out of respect of that. With regards to that, and again, I just want to drill down on the language and spend a little bit of time, and then we can flip back to June again with organization. But with language, one of the things that obviously I've seen is the cancel culture.
Mhm.
And this is why a lot of people feel, I suppose, scared, right? When we talk about being scared of these conversations, why are people scared? Well, they're scared because if they say the wrong thing, that can have serious repercussions. Now, when they say the wrong thing, they can also hurt someone's feelings, which I think is the point of what we're talking about. But it also has serious repercussions upon their reputation. Now, as well as having a wide variety of groups, you also have a wide variety of people that are more militant or more extreme in their beliefs about the language used. In other words, if I use the wrong word to you, that might be one thing, but if I use the wrong word to somebody else, they might feel extremely affected
I
by
mean,
that.
there's somebody listening right now who was like, oh, she didn't even get to finish the letters that usually show up, but then she didn't even get to the plus and the asterisks, and that'll be really upsetting to someone. And so I think to the piece around cancel culture is you have two options. One is have a thorough conversation with every possible human being you're about to interact with. I would call that impossible. The other one is to have a thorough conversation with yourself as to why you have chosen what you have chosen. If you're going to use gay as an umbrella term because it is impossible to have that other conversation, then you're prepared to explain to yourself or possibly to other people why you use the umbrella term that you do. If you're going to use LGBTQ, LGBTQIA, you're still going to leave somebody out. But the clearer you are on your intentions, you're not cancel proofing yourself in the sense that you'll never get any kind of offense or some kind of, pushback, but you're cancel proofing your own defensiveness because you know why you chose what you chose to choose.
So I want you to play therapist for a little bit with me, right? Because
Well, that's kind of your job.
yes, correct. But I'll tell you why. So we live in a very politically charged environment, but we have a certain group of people that are very much, let's just simplify things and reduce things down, be reductionist and say people on the extreme left. And you've got people then on the right, let's say, and or even in the middle. And what you have is that on the one hand, you ask yourself, why is there a need for people to use different language when referring to people? For example, the notion of him, his, her on your profile, like for your Zoom thing, which some people have, or calling yourself cisgendered as opposed to inverted commas normal, so that you're not perpetuating this notion that there's a normal and then there's all of the others that are in a different group, or being careful with the way in which you label things. And even from the point of view of anything from don't use the vernacular guys when you're talking to a group which is of mixed people, because that's leaning into, I suppose, a grouping which isn't always fair to some of the people in it, all the way to don't use the word tribal, or don't use this word or don't use that word. It gets to a stage where it's very difficult to have conversations in a certain context when you're very careful with all of the words you're using and you can't fully express yourself, even if you have absolutely no negative intention whatsoever. Or we're all racist to a degree, we're all sexist to a degree, we're all homophobic to a degree, in the sense that we're influenced by our own conscious biases. And the key is not to pretend that, oh, I don't see color, I don't see this, I don't do that, but own the fact that you have been influenced unconsciously as well, and try to come to terms with that, as you kind of beautifully said there, is try to recognize and have that conversation with yourself so that you own it and understand it and make accountants for it. But when you're having conversations and you're aware that people can get triggered, and this notion of triggering, which once again, it all comes from a good place. It all comes from the place which says there are people being disenfranchised and being treated abominably because of who they are as people and because of how they were born or because of the grouping that they're a part of. Right? And as a result of that, they've had to suffer for many years with terrible discrimination. And so we don't want that to happen anymore. So we want them to feel more included, and we want them to feel more listened to and heard and seen and respected like every human being deserves. And in respect to that, we want to alter some of the language we use to make that happen. We want to alter the policies. We want to do this. And that's a great intention. The problem is, to me, is that when we get to a stage that everyone turns around and says, I was triggered, that all of a sudden we fall into potentially the trap whereby anybody can get offended by anything. What I'm trying to say is that if I'm talking to some of my friends that wouldn't be, let's say, very much on the left, and I'm trying to talk to them about these kind of topics, what they'll jump to is the extreme examples from the extreme left and go, oh, you can't speak anymore today. You can't joke anymore today. They immediately go to this extremist, and they're actually right in the sense of, if you're with the wrong person, you can't say anything or you can't joke. But most people aren't like that. So with all of that vomit that I just spilled on the floor, can you find the chunks in that? You like this metaphor? Can you find the chunks in this vomit and fit them together and build us a nice little, like, what do you think of what I've said and what do you recommend?
So first up, I think chunky vomit is an excellent place of empathy for all of us. You're welcome. Because we've all felt it. We have all felt when the vomit has come at us. We have felt when we have done it to someone else. We also have felt, this metaphor is going way too far, when we've like slipped around in it and been like, "Ugh, I don't even know how I got here," right? So I think what's at the core is there has never been a time where all communication was permitted thoughtlessly. At all points of communication, throughout all points of communication, there have been thoughtless communication and there has been thoughtful communication. And what happens is that people have different expectations of themselves and what it means for them to be thoughtful. And when they are being communicated with, or even third party hear something that wasn't even meant to them, that becomes something that they don't think the other person thought about enough before they said it. So there's a lot of things happening here. So let me try and like do this. So first one is, triggers are our own individual responsibility. It is not someone else's responsibility to prevent me from me triggering myself. It is my responsibility to figure out what is triggering me. Now, usually a blowfish, right? Or we're going to keep the vomit metaphor going. I get triggered in a way that I don't realize the pattern. So then that's where my responsibility comes in, is to figure out what is the pattern, because until I figure that out, I'm blowfishing or vomiting all over someone else when I get triggered. So when my work is around self-responsibility, so then when I get triggered, what I need to do is like stop, remember what it feels like, and then try to figure out, when do I make someone else feel this way? So then I can become more thoughtful about who I am. Also, spoiler alert, that will also slow me down enough to realize the patterns that are triggering me. Everyone can get triggered by something. Right now, there is a listener going, you just got triggered by me telling you that you get triggered, right? So that's your work to do. If we're talking about the law, it is not illegal to offend someone. If we're talking about protected speech, speech that leads to more speech is actually more protected. So if you get offended and you vocalize how you are being offended, that is actually what free discourse is. Where the problem is that we're talking about the subjectivity of what it means to incite harm or violence, to make someone suffer, to create hate, to use your words. That is a very subjective place that can be very different with each individual listener, even if it's the same information. So when we start talking about legal regulations of what can be said and what can't be said, in theory, those are based on what a majority would find acceptable or unacceptable. But that majority is not representative by like 51% of all possible hearers of said message. So then that evolves and changes. Language evolves and changes. Even when I was doing the letters earlier, there is nothing wrong with saying bisexual, except it means there's only two sexual identities, and we're actually talking about gender. It gets way more complicated. And suddenly you're at like 8 different words I don't even know the definition of.
So I want you to just on this, because this is really helpful, Jess. I want you to give me a way of thinking about this. So one of the things I've seen some media folk talk, and I've also heard this example, and I've talked to people about this as well in personal conversations. Identifying in a certain way. So you have obviously the trans population and the choice to identify as something other than, let's say, physically you might have been born. But there's also the hijacking I see, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe again, feel free to correct me. But there's the hijacking of it with the extreme cases where people could identify as like other things, like again, I've heard this used in the media, and it's kind of an extremist media that I don't trust anything that comes out. But at the same time, nothing surprises me anymore that people would identify with someone 20 years younger and wants to get their age changed, or people would identify with a different color, or people would identify with, and I've heard an example of this in a school, people are allowed to identify as an animal of some nature. Could you explore with me a little bit about that? Do you think that's like, I don't know how to think about those things because I know my initial response I see it as very different to trans because I see the trans situation as being, even if you identify as non-binary, I don't fully understand it because I'm not in that situation, but I get it, right? But when you start identifying with as a different color, then that also crosses a different boundary where I'm like, well, that kind of could be also offensive in the other. Like, could you just talk a little bit about that? We're getting into the really uncomfortable places, which I just wanted to get in with you because you're the best person to talk to about this. So could you just talk a little bit about what I just said?
I
Your point.
I just wanna reiterate, you're talking about things that to me are like, what kind of sandwich do you wanna order? Right? So, like, none of this is even like, "Ooh, we need to talk about this." But that's because I've chosen and I get asked these questions all the time. So, anything is game, you can ask anything you want. So, what I am gonna do is I'm gonna answer that question, and I'm also going to go way back into the Wayback Machine when we started talking about companies tokenizing June as Pride Month. And
Sure.
I'm gonna use that as an example. So then we're like coming full circle.
Perfect.
So first thing I want to say is this very controversial statement. Are you ready?
Okay.
Some people are dumb.
Okay.
Okay. There is fake news. People are lying. That should not happen. Right. So let's take the story about the school that has to do the litter boxes because the kids count as kids. Heard this 4 million times, and it's never their kid's school. It's something they saw online, and it changes which state is where they are doing this because it's not true, right? There is some subjective line that is constantly being navigated of what is utterly ridiculous. And that utterly ridiculous pattern is very similar to your friends going to these super extreme places. But what about this particular thing? If we talk about just the boring extreme middle, you talked about the extreme left, the extreme right. Let's just talk about the extreme middle for a second. Care about any of this stuff, and it all sounds nuts. And when you start listening to individual things, so just you're like, yeah, I get that. That one's cool. I don't get that one. And that is our responsibility. And as a society, as a culture, we need to figure this out. So there are people, there's a lot of information about this, but there are people who identify as someone with a disability. So is it considered medically harmful to amputate a person's working limb because they identify as an amputee? According to the American Medical Association, you are not allowed to medically do that. That is considered doing harm. And that person more likely would have like a psychological diagnosis
Mm.
than like, if you just chop off my left leg, I'd be fine. Like, that's not considered okay, right? Now, I don't know if that's right. I also don't know if carrots talk to each other. And it's totally cool just not knowing if vegetables have a language.
I think they have. I'm just going to throw it out there. I think carrots do talk to each other. I cannot prove it, but I would guess that they can.
I didn't even set you up for that. You did that all on your own. All right.
Or is it true?
Sorry. Is anyone still listening? So we're still here? Okay, great. So I just want to point out that some things that might seem ludicrous are actually discussed, and someone somewhere has drawn a line, and that line says yes, or the side of the line says no. Then there are other scenarios that to me sound absolutely ridiculous. And every time I hear about the litter boxes in school because someone identifies as a cat, it just makes my head explode, which is my responsibility to realize that is a little trigger for me. Because how are you a thoughtful, literate, educated human being repeating a story with such sweaty exasperation because it never dawned on them it's not true?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I just described that I'm totally comfortable describing as truth, and that is a problem. And then this thing, notice I'm having a different reaction.
Although I will defend it for a second, and that is in America, nothing surprises me, Jess. And I have to say, you know, on all sides, like I've seen so many crazy things, even without getting political, even from a political level, that like if you tell me something, I'm not sure if it's not true. Like I doubt it because it's America. And I wouldn't, if this was Ireland, there's no way I believe it because we're far too cynical to do stuff like, but in America, I don't know. I don't think it's as straightforward as just going, that's completely mental. There's no way that's happening.
But my
Well,
point is that even if there was that measure, it would constantly be evolving and changing
sure.
based on what we can currently tolerate. Over the last 6 years, all of us in the United States who have been paying attention have reached a new level of what we can tolerate. There are things that occur in the news in the last 6 years that if they occurred in the news 20 years ago, I would assume it was a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And
This is
now it's Wednesday, right? So that line moves. Now hold on, because I'm getting ready to make a big leap.
sure.
Here's the leap. If someone can draw a line in the ground and determine what they do want to do and what they don't want to do, what they do want to stand for, what they don't want to stand for, that is exactly the same thing of noting when you are triggered and when you're not triggered, and being responsible for yourself and not being responsible for yourself, making an intentional choice of what words to use so that if you get feedback or somebody tells you, like, you can't use that word anymore, kind of why you chose what you did. If we go all the way back to corporations who decide that they want to be supportive of June because it is gay month and they don't have to care about gay people the other 11 months, it's only in June that they care about gay people. What is hypocritical about that is that gay people are 12 months out of the year. Just like Black History Month, Black people are Black all the rest of the 11 months, but in February, is that okay? But bad things still happen to Black people in February. Bad things still happen to gay people in June. As a company, in theory, a company has a set of values. And what I preach to companies is that what you believe in as a company should be at the heart of your company's decisions. If you want to go all Milton Friedman and what you believe in is that your shareholders need to make a profit, then every choice you are making, that is at the heart of it. That's the line that your company has drawn. If your company is saying that it has drawn a line that is around equity, inclusion, diversity, belonging, things like that, then it needs to intentionally do something that backs that up. So, for example, and I'm going to pick on Nike really quick. Nike is one of the biggest companies that took on Colin Kaepernick, who was the football player who took a knee, and that became this big political thing. Okay, great. So then they paid him, they made him a spokesperson, they did this whole line about Black Lives Matter. It was great, right? Like, got the left all excited. They were all fans of Nike. Everything is great. Nike also has a pride shoe and a pride line, does all this thing. Nike is also a company that gives a ton of money to conservative politicians. It does both. It reallocates the funds of the left and gives it to the right. I work with very conservative clients. I reallocate funds on the right and reallocate them to the left. So neither of us are necessarily being hypocritical if we know that we are doing it. It's the users that don't necessarily know that one is going in and one is coming out. And that's where things can get questionable. If it is just being tokenized, it means the organization doesn't know where that line is. As an organization or as an individual, that's our job.
That's really great, Jess.
Full circle.
Full circle. Love it. One more question on this, and then I want to go into the lightning round because has been enormously valuable. Honestly, Jess, it's been great. If you're an organization, small, medium, large, whatever, or an entrepreneur, once you have that awareness about whether or not, let's say, DEI is going to be an important part of your values, right? If you believe in it and you want to make it that way, what are some of the things that you should be looking to do consistently throughout the year that acts in alignment with those values? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that, oh, we'll throw this at them and that'll be fine, or we'll promote ourselves to the rest of the world and make a big deal in June. But then when it comes to the rest, as you said, the 11 months of the year, it's like, forget about them. What are some consistent actions you could take as a business that would align with those values?
Do you want an easy, digestible answer, or do you want a save people money, bigger answer?
Could you do both?
I can.
Great.
All right. Easy, digestible answer. It's a Brussels sprout, so some of you aren't going to like it. Some of you will like it if it's covered in bacon grease and Parmesan. So
And then
condiment,
you won't need to vomit it out afterwards.
right? So easy little answer. You are currently failing. You are currently part of the problem. Just digest that because then you can take responsibility. The reason why I am so confident at saying you, me, all of us, every organization, every person is the problem is that we do not know what we don't know. Our job is to become more conscious of what we are unconscious of. But if you are unconscious of something, it means you don't know it. So just accept that there are things that you don't know currently that are causing a problem. Step one, that's it. Nobody wants to do that step. They want to do way more complicated things, but all you'd have to do is do that and then it'd be fine. So that's the easy answer. The more complicated answer, which starts with one question, and that is, who are you currently excluding? If you can answer who you today are excluding from an initiative, from your friend group, from who you friend on Facebook, who you invite to lunch, whatever. You can take the scope out however far big you want. But the question is, who are you currently excluding? Our knee-jerk reaction is absolutely no one. Well, that's impossible. You have to be discerning and you are unconsciously excluding people. But if you can practice who you're consciously excluding, it becomes easier to notice who you are unconsciously excluding. That's our work to be doing. So even on Facebook, I'm a classic Gen Xer. I still use Facebook. Who am I friending? Like, what are their politics? What economic class are they in? How do they racially identify? Where do they live in the country? What kind of job do they have? Is there a type of person that I instantly friend? And are there types of people I ignore? Are there types of people that I ask Facebook to remove from showing me they exist? if I can take responsibility for that, then I've just become more conscious of what I was previously unconscious of. It seems easy. It's not, but it is simple.
So if my friend requested you on Facebook, would you accept me?
I haven't yet.
Okay, lightning round. Thank you. This has been wonderful, Jets. A favorite movie?
Three Amigos.
Love it. Favorite author?
Carson McCullers.
Favorite book?
Ballad of Sad Cafe is a Carson McCullers short story that is in a book of her short stories. Does that count?
Okay, yeah. Favorite artist?
I'm going to say someone on the street doing art live that I've never seen before in my life.
Love it. Musician?
I am in an old twangy country space, but I'll go with Johnny Cash. I listen to old twangy, somebody stole my three-legged dog country music.
Favorite philosopher?
My husband.
Favorite TV series?
I don't watch TV, but I did just start rewatching 6 Feet Under. I think that's my all-time favorite show.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
The ability to, well, I forgot what it is in Harry Potter, but when I forget something and I can and it shows up in my hand.
It's called memory. Oh, you mean in your hand? Okay, I don't know what that is. If
It's
you
like
could,
a Koshio, I read it. I don't know how they pronounce it, but like ACIO something, where my car keys. I wish I had a sweater right now, but like that.
anyway, ideal time travel. If you could travel anywhere, past, present, or future, where would you go? And why?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Do I get to change something or do I just show up and I can't change anything?
Answer both.
It's always both.
Are you going to kill Hitler?
No, it'd be before then.
Oh, both would kill Hitler.
The first moment when someone decided to give access to reading to someone versus not, I would just make them allow everyone to read. Reading should not be an accessible thing. I mean, it should be an accessible thing. It shouldn't be off limits to anyone. That'd be the moment in time. I'd go. If I can't change anything, I don't know, like Great Gatsby period, just because it sounded hella fun.
Alternative location. If you were going to live anywhere else besides where you live, where would you live?
Manhattan.
If you could do anything other than what you're doing, what would you be? As a career?
Oh, if I could get paid to nap.
I know.
Oh my God, I'd be so rich. I slept 18 hours unmedicated last night.
That I don't know. That's your superpower right there.
Oh, I am a sleeper. I can alphabetize things, I can fold a fitted sheet, and I can sleep. Those are my
Incredible.
3 superpowers.
Incredible. I think there's a lot of listeners out there very jealous of you. One piece of advice for the world at a billboard, you like one piece of advice to let everyone know, what would it be?
You are doing better than you think you are.
Thank you very much, Jess. On that, you have a book. The book is called Good Enough Now. Could you give us in a few words what the gist of that is about?
Good Enough Now is doing the best you can with what you've got some of the time. It is a journey through all the individual reflection activities that I have put myself repetitively through to try to be more responsible for who and how I am in the world.
And why is this some of the time?
Because if it was all the time, you'd never start.
Love it. Where can people find out more about you, Jess?
You could go to jesspettitt.com, except no one can pronounce or spell my last name. So you can also go to goodenoughnow.com, which you can spell.
Well, this was not only good enough now, this was great enough before. And so thanks a million, Jess. As always, a pleasure. Really appreciate it. And excited to have you on again. If you haven't been like turned against me and you don't hate this version of me.
Speaker Owen is new to me, but I'm happy to come back anytime you like. It's been super fun. And happy almost Pride Month for people who may or may not mean it for the remaining 11 months of the year.
Except when this is being released, this will be maybe after Pride Month. So hope you had a happy Pride Month.
I hope you had a happy Pride Month every single day. So I'm a little embarrassed about myself. Pride Month to everyone.